What's up guys, welcome back to Unreal Dev Hub. In today's video, I'm going to teach you step by step how to script a Souls style elevator that moves up and down when the user presses a button. If you stick around for this video, you're going to learn a lot about blueprint scripting and how to create functional logic in your game. Let's jump in. Alright, and as we get started, I just want to say first off that I understand everyone learns at their own pace, so if things are moving a little fast, feel free to throw the play rate to 0.5 or 0.75. And additionally, as you follow along, I would encourage that you name things exactly as I name them, organize things as I organize them, so it's easier for you to follow along. That being said, let's jump in. So first we're going to create a series of assets. I'm going to right click, and I will create a new blueprint class. We're going to make an actor, and we'll call this BP underscore Elden Ring elevator system. This is the blueprint that everything's going to happen inside of, and we're going to do one more thing now. We're going to right click and we'll create a new material. We'll call this M underscore see through green. This is what we're going to use to basically show where our starting and stopping points for our elevator are. So first we'll just deal with the material. We'll double click to open this up. I'm going to create a constant 3 vector. I'm going to right click, say convert to parameter. We'll call this color. I'm going to click down here in the default value. We'll set this to a green. We're going to drag the RGB into base color. And then I'm going to right click and I will type dither, D-I-T-H-E-R. This is going to allow us to mask this without doing a translucent. We're going to click out here into the graph so that these options pop up in the details panel. We're going to change this blend mode from opaque to masked. We'll see now that this opacity mask has popped up. We're going to drag the result of this dither into the opacity mask. We're going to see that now this becomes what looks to be translucent, but really it's just sort of a gridded pixel thing that allows it to appear see-through but without being translucent. We'll save this. And now what we're going to do is we're going to create the 2 static meshes that appear in this blueprint. We're just going to make new ones so that we can create custom sizes and pivots without scaling a cube. So up here in the... So we're going to make sure we're in this folder. Up here in the where it says selection mode, we're going to drop down to modeling. And this panel is going to pop up on the side. So I'm going to select box, and it's going to come up with a series of default options, but first we'll do the button, and what we're going to do is we'll set this value to 100, 150. So that's what I have before. And by default, the pivot is at the bottom, which is great. So I'm going to click, and I'm going to hit accept. And once we've done that, it will populate that into our content browser. We want to make sure I already had it set, but you'll want to select where it says new asset location. By default, it's going to say, I think either auto gen folder or world relative. In this instance, let's set it to current folder. So for me, because I have current folder set, it's going to populate here. And I'm going to call this sm underscore elevator underscore button. And I'll just call it rectangular because I already have an asset with that name. And we're going to do this again, and I'm going to create a box of width 400, 400, and we'll leave it at 50. And I'm going to click out here. I'll hit accept. And then again, it's populated here, and I'm going to rename it. I will call it sm underscore platform for elevator. I'm going to save this. And so now we have our 2 meshes. So now we're going to combine this in our blueprint and start adding our logic. All right, now let's continue and add some logic to our blueprint. We'll change the spec to selection mode up here. And I'm going to open up my content drawer. You can also use Control Space as the hotkey to pop this in and out. And I'm going to open up my blueprint that we've created. So this, as I'm sure you're aware, is where all of the logic will take place for this particular system. So if you're new to Blueprint and new to Unreal Engine, this is the blueprint that we're going to recreate, and the blueprint is what's going to house all of the logic. So I've opened up my blueprint. and this is where we're going to add a series of components, and we're just going to start and add them all at once. So I'm going to add a static mesh. We'll call this platform. I'm going to reselect the scene root. I'm going to add another static mesh. And the reason you want to make sure to either deselect a component or select the root is that if I add something, if I add a component while this is selected, it's going to parent it to that. So if I add a point light, you can see it has been parented to that, which in this situation, I don't want to parent the things. So I'm going to just add another, I'm going to add what's called a scene component. So I'm going to add one. I'm going to select this. I'm going to press Control D to duplicate it. It's just going to make it faster. And then I'm going to add a box collision. So I'm going to type collision up here. Again, I'm going to select, okay, so we'll start there and then we'll add a little more logic. So I'm going to go to my viewport so I can see the things in world space or in this sort of local space. And so here's how we're going to do this. So we'll start with our platform. And when I select it, by default, there is no mesh assigned to it. So I'm going to open my content drawer. I'm going to select my platform for elevator mesh. I'm going to use this gray arrow to assign it here. So I've done that. Now we can see that my mesh is populated in the viewport. And we're going to go up to our second static mesh. We're going to call this button. Again, this is just going to be easiest if you name things as I do. You can get creative in the future. So I'm going to go back to our content drawer. And I'm going to select my button that we've created, which is our little mesh. I'm going to use this gray arrow to populate that here. And we'll notice it's in the ground. That's sort of okay for now. And our scene, our first one, we're going to grab this and we'll call this button start. We'll grab our second one, and I'm going to just sort of doing a slow double click to rename. I'll call this button end. You can also right click and go down to rename or hit F2 on your keyboard. So we're going to grab these 4 things and we are going to select them and parent them to our platform because we do want them to be attached to our platform in this situation. So I'm going to grab button, and I'm going to move it up, let's say 15 units. I'm going to grab button start. And I'm going to change it also over here to move it up 15 units. And I'm going to keep button end in the same XY, but I'll add 5 units. So basically what's going to happen is we're going to cache the location of the button start and end, which is relative to the platform. Then we're going to move the button in between those 2 locations when it's stepped on. We're going to do something similar for the platform start and end. And so to do that, I'm going to add a new static mesh. I'm going to select this one in my content drawer so that when I type static mesh, it's automatically going to select that and it'll name it that. But I'll just rename it. So I'm going to call this platform start. I'm going to press Control D on my keyboard to duplicate it. And I'm going to call this platform end. And we want to make sure that these are not parented to our platform. Then we'll select both of these. You can either shift click or control and click to select multiple things. Then I'm going to grab this material that we created and we're going to use the gray arrow here to assign it. And then we'll grab our platform end and we're going to move it to, let's say, 1500 units in the Z. So now we see that, this is where our platform is going to start. And our green box is kind of in here, but we're going to make all of it hidden in game and have no collision. So we can do that now. Let's select both of these platform start and end. We're going to type collision. We're going to change this a few options here. So where it says generate overlap events, we're going to set this to false. Can characters step on? We're going to say no. And collision presets is going to be no collision. This basically just makes these kind of visual only and allow us to show where we want the elevator to be in our viewport. Okay, let's go now to our box, which is going to be the trigger. And we want to make sure that we can overlap this. Right now, it's below ground and we're going to adjust this just a little bit. So we'll change the extent to 50, 50, 50, and we're going to move this up, let's say 50 units. So it sits on top of the trigger like that, and let's compile and save. Let's now, for our box, change the collision, and we're going to set this to where it says overlap all dynamic. We're going to change this to trigger. This means that it's going to allow us to overlap using the pawn, which is right here, and that's exactly what we want. And we're also going to change this option that says can character step on. We're going to say no. And we should be good there. All right, now we're going to add some logic to do all of our movement. So we will go to our event graph, and this is where all of our scripting is going to take place. We can delete these two that say actor begin overlap and event tick because we won't need them for this blueprint. And let's start by adding some information. So on event begin play, what we're going to do is we're just going to cache the location of the start point and the end point for the elevator. So I'm going to drag my platform start and end. I'm going to drag them out onto my graph. I'm going to pull off start, and I'm going to say get world location. I'm going to Control C, Control V. I'm going to pull this in here. I'm going to pull off the end, and I'm going to say promote to variable. And we'll call this, as we can see down here, we're going to call this platform start location. And I'm just going to select this variable down here, and I'm going to press Control D. You can also right click and say duplicate. I just use the hotkey. So I'm going to press Control D when it's selected, and we'll call this platform end location. I'm going to drag this out here, and I'll say set. We'll do this linearly. So I'm going to drag this into here. I'm going to pull this over here. I'm going to drag this over here. Then we'll drag this right in there. We're going to drag this into there. So basically, just right in the very beginning, this is going to be our simplest logic of this blueprint. We are going to grab the platform start as it exists in world space, cache the location to a variable, and do the same for the end mesh. And again, these are just the start mesh here, and then the end mesh here. So we're just determining and caching the variable for where we want them to go so we can use it later. Amazing. That is all we're going to do on begin play. So let's select this and drag a comment around it. And we're going to press C on our keyboard, and we'll say cache location information. Now we're going to do our logic for the overlap of the trigger. So this right here, which is called box, and we can rename this to trigger, just so we can recognize it, because, you know, there's boxes and there's buttons and there's all that, but you know, it's a trigger. So I'm going to right click this, and I will say add event. We'll go to add on component begin overlap. And at the same time, we're just going to add our on end overlap. So I right clicked here, add event on end overlap, because we'll be using this as well. But we'll start with our begin overlap. So what we're going to do is we're going to first just test that the other actor is a character. There's different ways to test, and we're not going to cast the blueprint version of this. We're just going to test that it's a character by using cast character. So I'll say cast to character. And we're going to need a series of Booleans, which are true, false values. So I'm going to press plus. It's going to give me a Boolean by default, but if it's not that, you can just click this here to set the variable type. So I'm going to call this player currently overlapping. And we're going to create 4 Booleans. So I'm going to press Control D again. I'll call this button has been pushed. I'm going to press Control D again. I'm going to say elevator is moving. Control D one more time, and I'll say button completely pushed in. So what we're going to do is basically right when we overlap, we're going to set that the player is currently overlapping. So that's, again, all these things are important elements of logic. So just please follow along and test, and we'll test in a little bit. So we're going to need 3 conditions to allow the button to be pressed. And those are going to be button has been pushed, elevator is not moving, and button is not completely pushed in. So I'm going to grab these 3. I'm going to say get. And for all of these, we want them to be false. So I'm going to type not bool. So I'm going to type not Boolean into the search. And this is basically going to give us the opposite of what the value is currently set at. So I'm going to Control C this, Control C, Control V this. I'm going to drag these in here. I'm going to pull off of here and say and Boolean. I'm going to hit this pin right here. And in order to proceed with the logic, we're going to need all 3 of these to be false. So basically, we can only trigger the button if it has not been pushed, if it is not moving, and if it is not already pushed in. So I'm gonna right click here and I'll say branch. I'm gonna drag from here over into here, this into that. And we're going to now set button has been pushed. So I'm gonna I dragged that from over here. I'm gonna say set button has been pushed to true. And we're going to call another event. So I'm going to right click down here and I'll say add custom event. And we will say move button to destination. And the destination is basically just describing the start and stop position, or the sort of unpressed and pressed position. We're just going to call it the destination. And I'm going to add, I'm going to select this event. And under inputs, I'm going to hit this plus sign right here. And we're going to call this Boolean move button to pushed in position. And over here, what we're going to do is once we've successfully overlapped, assuming these are true, we're going to call the function we just created, which is move button to destination. You can also drag that out from here, but I just typed it in. Okay. And in this situation, we're going to use true because we want to move it to the pushed in destination, to the pushed in position. So let's do our work. It's going to require a little bit of setup, and then we'll be able to test. So we're just going to do a bunch of the logic first, and then we'll test. So let's see. Next, we will do the button move. So we'll do the button move first, and then we'll do the elevator. So I'm going to do first the move button to destination logic. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the button end and button start out. We're going to do something very similar to what we did before when we cached the locations. I'm going to say get world location. I'm going to Control C, Control V right here. I'm going to pull off here and I'll say promote to variable. We'll call this button end location. I'm going to Control D right here. I'm going to say button start location. I'm going to drag this out over to here. I'll say set like that. I'll drag this over here. I'm going to connect that there. And I'm going to drag this into here. To make it a little bit cleaner, what I'm going to do is I'm going to collapse this to a function. We're not using this multiple times, but it's just good to have for the visual of the blueprint. So I'm going to right click and I will say collapse to function. And we'll call this cache button locations and move this over here. I'm going to right click and I'll say branch. I'm going to drag the move button to pushed in position Boolean into this branch like that. I'm just double clicking on these to add reroute nodes, clean things up. And now we're going to add what's called a timeline. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to say add timeline, and I'll call this move button. I'm going to drag the true into the play from start, the false into the reverse from end, and now we're going to click into the move button to add a track. So basically a timeline is just going to evaluate things over time. So this is an easy way to evaluate values on curves to move values within your blueprint. So You'll see what this means in just a second. I'm going to add this track. So where it says add track, I'll select add float track. We'll call this button move lerp or linear interpolate. I'm going to add 2 keys. I'm going to right click here anywhere on this graph, and I'll say add key to curve. The first one is going to be time 0 value 0. I'm going to right click again, and I'm going to change this to time 1 value 1. I'm also going to set the length of this curve. This is very important, to 1. And I'm going to select both of these, and then I'm going to press 1 on my keyboard, which is going to change the tangents. You can also do that by right-clicking and changing the key interpolation type. So now that we have that, we're going to go back to our event graph. So within this timeline, this is going to basically play, and it will spit out the values from this curve over time out this result right here. And as we do that, we're going to update the location of the button to move it in world space. So I'm going to grab my button right here, and I'm going to say set world location. I'm going to drag update into here, and I'm going to pull off here, and I will say lerp vector. We're going to use this top one here. And I'm going to drag the alpha value in from our timeline, which is again going to move from 0 to 1. As we move from 0 to 1, we'll be able to shift between the A and B values. The A value is going to be our button start, and the end value is going to be our button end. So it's important that we're going to cache these on begin play, because the relative location of the buttons moves as it moves with the platform, but the platform location only needs to happen on begin play because the platform goal doesn't move. Great. So basically, when we go play from start, it's going to move from 0 to 1, which means it's going to move from start location to end. It's going to linear interpolate those 2 vectors, basically moving from start to end, and then set the world location of the button, which is our component right here. All right. Now what we're going to do is we're going to, when finished, we're going to switch. Actually, I'll drag off here. I'm going to say switch on timeline direction. I'm going to drag finished into here. And what we're going to do now is we're going to drag off our button has been pushed. And I'm going to set this, and I'm going to set button completely pushed in like this. So when we go backwards, which means we're basically popping back up, we're going to do this to unset it, basically reset some of the variables, which we'll get into that in just a little bit. We're going to set both these to false. When the button is done, that means it's moved from the start to the pushed in position, which is the end. And then once that's done, we're going to move the elevator. So now we'll add the logic to move the elevator between positions. To do that, we're going to add custom event, and then we'll call this move elevator to destination. And right here, we're going to drag off forward, and we're going to say move elevator to destination. And we're going to set button, we're going to Control C, Control V this to say button completely pushed in is true. So again, what's happening here is we're caching the button locations. We're moving the button between the 2 locations with this lerp. Once it's done, if it went forward, which means it's moving from start to end, meaning popped up to pushed in, we're going to call to move the elevator to the destination and say that the button has been pushed in. And then we'll get to the reverse logic in a second, but basically when it pops back up, which we'll deal with later, we're saying the button has not been pushed to reset it, and the button is not completely pushed in because it's all the way up. So we're going to set both those to false. So make sure this is true and this is false. All right, now let's do our elevator logic. So we're going to drag our elevator is moving logic off. We're going to say get, and we're going to add a branch, right click and type branch. Pull off right here, drag this in there. And so basically we don't want to remove the elevator if it's already moving. So this must be false. And so if this is false, once we start moving it, we're going to say we are moving now to disallow doing it again. And we're going to add a timeline. So I'm going to right click and I'll say add timeline. And I'm going to call this elevator, or we'll call this platform movement timeline. We're going to leave just a little bit of space right here because we'll do one thing in just a second to allow us to change the speed of this easily. And so I'm going to right click, say branch. Let's see, do I have? So I'm going to create a new Boolean. I'm going to pull off here and I'll say promote to variable. And I'll say elevator at start location. So that's going to pop up down here. I spelled that incorrectly. Amazing. All right. So if the elevator is at the start, we want to go to the end. If the elevator is at the end, we want to go to the start. So we're going to use this one Boolean to make sure that's the case. And again, before we test, we'll make sure all of these values are as we expect. So elevator at start location, true, because it's going to start at that location. If it's true, play from start. If it's false, reverse from end. We're going to do basically the exact same thing as we did before. We're going to double click. We're going to add a float track up here. So add float track. We'll call this elevator move lerp for linear interpolate. We're going to make this 1. And make sure to make this 1. We'll add some logic in just a second to allow us to scale this play rate. I'm going to right click, add key, set this value here, time 0, value 0. Right click one more time, add key to curve. We'll change this to time 1, value 1. And we'll press 1 again while these keys are selected to make this a little bit of a easing curve. Now we'll go back to our event graph. So basically, same as before, we're going to do a very similar operation. We can actually, we'll just right click and say set world location. And we can use the platform here. So that's going to automatically assign our component, which is the platform. If you don't get the component version of it, you can just drag this off the components panel like that. And then we're going to do the exact same thing we did before. So we'll pull off our new location. We'll say lerp vector. And we already cached our start and end location earlier, so that's what we did up here. So we're going to grab our start location, drag it in here. End location, drag it in here. And we're going to use our move lerp, which is our 0 to 1, which is what's going to allow us to blend between these two values. And we're going to use that to move the world location of the platform. So we'll go through right now. We'll add some base comments just to keep this thing clean. I'm going to select all of this. This is my button move. So I'm just going to press C on my keyboard. We'll call this, we'll just type move button between start and end. We'll grab this, select it, say C on the keyboard, move platform between start and end. And we'll just do the play rate adjustment right now. So we're going to grab, make a little space right here between these two. We can grab our platform movement timeline off of our components panel on the side under my blueprint. I'm going to grab this, drag off. I'll say get. I'm going to pull off here and say set play rate. I'm going to press Control on my keyboard, which allows me to grab and move this execution pen if I select it with the left mouse. I'm going to drag this in here now. I'm going to pull off here. I'm going to type divide. I'm going to type 1 into the top value. I'm going to pull off here and say promote to variable. And we'll call this elevator move duration. So basically what we're going to do is, because the length of this is 1, and doing this 1 divided by, and if we put the number in here, so if I compile, I'll set, let's say 2 seconds as the default duration. This 1 divided by with the duration of the timeline will allow us to just set this as the desired time. Amazing. Now what we're going to do is we'll add some logic to deal with this once we've finished that movement. So once we have finished, what we want to do is, let's see, we're going to set elevator at start location. We're going to pull off here to finished. We'll grab elevator at start location, and we're going to say not Boolean. So basically we're going to set it to whatever the opposite of what it currently is, because we know that is set right here. It's already been set here. So we're going to set the opposite of it when it's complete, because it is now the opposite because we've moved from one end to the other. We're going to set that the elevator is not moving. So we'll grab elevator as moving. We're going to set that to false. And we're going to grab, and so this part is going to be maybe a little confusing, but just follow along and I'll explain as we go. We're going to add a branch. So right click and say branch. And we're going to test for player is currently overlapping. So I'm going to drag off here. I'll say get, pull off right here. And basically what we're going to do is, if the player is not currently standing on top of the button, we're automatically going to drag it down. But if the player is standing on the button, we don't want to push it up. So what we're going to do is we'll wait and basically run a timer, which will allow us to wait until the player is off and use the end overlap event to trigger that variable, which will allow the timer to progress this logic. So again, we'll get there. Just follow along. And it's going to be great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a custom event, and I'll say add custom event, and I'll call this set up delayed timer. And I'm going to add over here, I'm going to type move button to destination. And this is going to be basically saying once we've reached the end, so basically once we've reached the end, the platform is moved to the location. If the player is overlapping, if the player is not overlapping, we're just automatically going to pop it back out. And if they are, we're going to do it on a delay. So, all right. So what we're going to do right here is we'll pull off and we will say set up delayed timer. And that's going to call to this event right here. We'll use this elsewhere as well. So I'm making it just an own event. And on set up delayed timer, let's jump into it. So I'll pull off here and I'll say set timer by event. I'm going to pull off here and say create event. I'm going to click select function and we'll say create a matching event. And we'll call this trigger button release. Just going to drag this over here and we'll move it all in a second. So we're just going to run this timer on every, let's say, 0.25 seconds. We're going to say looping is true, so it just keeps hitting the timer. I'm going to grab where it says return value. I'm going to pull out and I will say promote to variable. So we'll cache this timer. I'll call this, I'm just going to call this timer because it's the only one we'll have. And what we're going to do is we'll pull off of here. And we're just going to basically be running this event. We're going to just be testing two variables. Those two things are going to be that the player is not currently overlapping. So I'm going to type not Boolean. So we want it to be false that the player is overlapping. I'm going to Control C, Control V. We also want the elevator to not be moving. So I'm going to drag this in there. I'm going to pull off of here and I'll say and Boolean. I'm going to drag this in here, drag this in here. And if both of these are true, so basically we're going to continuously test on this timer that it's going to call trigger button release, which is this event right here. We're going to make sure we're going to keep asking, is the player overlapping? And is the elevator moving? If both of those are false, then we can move the button. So I'm going to pull off here and I'll say move button to, let's see, what did I call this? Move button to destination. So I'm just going to Control C, Control V this right here. Add that in there. And we're going to grab our timer. I'm just going to drag it over here. I'm going to say get timer. I'll pull off and I'll say clear and invalidate timer by handle. Basically, this is just going to nullify that timer. It's like clearing an array or something, but we're just clearing the timer. So let's add some comments around this. C for comment. I'm going to say call, or I'll just say test for player on trigger and moving elevator. I'm going to grab this and I'll say start timer event for test. And then we'll move all of this over here. And I'm going to expand this a little bit to just make things tidy. All right, so we have like 85% of the logic. And now we're going to add the logic for our exit trigger. So what we're going to do is we're going to do our end overlap event. And I'm going to pull off other actor and I'll say cast to character. And I'm going to set if we have exited, that means we are not currently overlapping. So I'm going to say set player currently overlapping. I just copied it from here. Is false. We're going to do a branch. So right click and say branch. I'm going to drag this in here. We're going to continue to do this logic. And we're going to say button. So I'm going to say get button has been pushed. And so we're only going to continue to do this logic if the button has been pushed. So there's no need to pop up the button if it hasn't been pushed. So we're also going to make sure that we're going to test if the elevator is moving. So I'm going to say get elevator is moving. I'm going to add a branch. So right click and type branch or hold B on the keyboard and left mouse. So after this, we're going to say, is the elevator moving? If so, we're going to move the button to the destination. So I'm just going to pull off here and I'll say move button to destination. And I'm going to pull off here and I will say, we're going to call our timer event. So we called this setup delayed timer. So I'll call this set up delayed timer. And we should be good to go. I'm going to add some comments and then we're going to discuss what exactly is happening here. And then we're going to run some tests. So I'm going to grab this. I'm going to press C and I'll call this overlap start. I'm going to grab this and I'll say overlap end. And we're good. So let's just run through exactly what is happening in this blueprint. Okay, so on begin play, we're caching our start location and end location. When we overlap, we're testing that this is the character overlapping. We're going to say we are now overlapping. We will only proceed to do logic for moving the button and then later the elevator if the button has not been pushed, the button is not moving, and the button is not already completely pushed in. So we're going to say immediately once those tests are succeeded that we have started the button push, so that the button is now pushed. And we're going to say we're going to move the button to the pushed in position through this function here. When we do that, we're going to cache our locations for where the world locations of the start and end goals of the button are, which again are these little scene components attached to the platform. If we want to move it to the pushed in position, that means we're going from start to end. We're using a timeline to move it between two locations in world space. If we're moving from end to start, that means this is false. So that means we're going to go basically from pushed in to released. If we are pushing the button in, that means we want to move the elevator. We say button is already pushed in. So we're going to move the elevator. When that happens, we just do a confirmation that it's not moving. Once it is, that's good. We say, now you are moving. We set the play rate to the designated speed using some of this division logic we created. We're going to determine, in the beginning, we're just by default setting this blueprint to at start location in the beginning. So it's going to move from the start location to the end location, setting the platform as it updates from this linear interpolation value. And then once it's done, so once it's finished, we're going to set it to the opposite of what it currently is, because that's just what we're going to do. And we're going to say you're done moving, so elevator is not moving. And whether or not the player is currently overlapping it, we are going to either set up a delayed timer so that it can push up the button when the player steps off, or immediately push up the button if the player is not standing on the collision. So now let's jump into our level and test out how this works. All right, so now we're going to test this out in our own levels. So you can grab your blueprint, drag it into the map, and I'm just going to push mine up into the wall like that. And let's, I'm going to adjust this green box up here. So this is basically going to determine where the end is. So I'm going to select platform end. I'm going to drag this down to something like that. And the current speed is 2. We'll expose that in just a moment. So I'm going to say play from here. I'm going to jump on. I'm going to press the button. We're going to see it sink in. The elevator is going to move up. And right now we can see that it's not trying to push back out on this button until I step off, and then it's going to pop back up. So I'm going to step on it. It's going to move down. And we can see actually that if I go into the debug of this, we're firing off this timer to determine when the player exits. So it keeps testing. But as you can see here, the player currently overlapping is true. So that's going to prevent this from moving forward. So the second I step off, that's going to be set to false, and it's going to pop back up. So we're going to see if you followed along. Hopefully this should work perfectly. Now let's just make a few minor modifications. So what we can do is we'll go back into our blueprint, and we can use a few materials that are built into the engine to make this a little prettier. What we'll also do is we'll grab our platform start and end. In our details panel, we'll search and we'll say hidden in game so that we don't see those. We already set the collision of those to have no collision. So if you didn't before, make sure you do that now. And let's go into our viewport. The default is kind of ugly, this gray box. So now let's just, what we'll do is there's some materials already in here in starter content. So I'm actually just going to select our platform. I'm going to go here to materials, and I'll select where it says world grid, and I'm going to type brick. And so if I click these, the starter content, it's not great, but it's better than gray. And so you can pick something you like. I'll use this clay old, something like that. Beautiful. And then I'll differentiate the platform, and we'll make that a concrete. So I'm going to click that. And so now we at least have some amount of visual differentiation. So I'll compile and I'll save. And now when I test this back out in my world, if I play from here, I'm going to hop on, press the button. It's going to sink down. Then it'll pop back up when I leave. Beautiful. One general note is that if you want to have a little bit more control, we added this elevator move duration before. So right now it's set to 2, but if I click this little eyeball right here, what that's going to allow me to do once I hit compile is it's going to expose that duration to the blueprint level. So now if I were to, let's say, add a higher elevator. So if I were to grab the end like that, drag it upwards. And maybe I want this to be a really long, slow elevator. I can change this, let's say to 4 seconds. And I'm going to right click and I'll say play. I'm going to hit the button. Now it's going to move just a little bit slower over a longer duration of time. What's great about this as well is that I believe the way this is actually built, this is kind of a live test, is that if I change, I can change the, this to be a diagonal elevator or a horizontal elevator. So if I wanted this to be like a sliding platform, I could drag this horizontally instead of just vertically. So we'll give that a try. You could run it along rails. So now it's going to move horizontally. So, you could use it for sort of sliding platforms instead of just elevators. So that is all for today's video. Again, feel free to go back and see if there's anything you missed. But if you have any questions, leave a comment. And if there's any other videos or topics you'd like covered in the future, let me know. I hope you all enjoyed this video and have a wonderful day. See you next time.